In this video, I'm going to be reassembling the top end of my 2024 KTM 300 EXC TBI. This is part 3 and the final part of my 2024 KTM 300 EXC TBI top end rebuild. If you missed part 1 and part 2, please check those out. In part 1, I disassembled the bike and did some measurements of the cylinder. And based on those, I ordered a piston kit. I'll show next in more detail what's included in the kit. And in part 2, I rebuilt the power valve on the cylinder, which you can see here. Definitely check that out if you're going to be rebuilding your electronic power valve on your 2024 or 2025 KTM. Here you can see everything included in the KTM OEM piston kit. I'll put the part number on the screen now. The kit is available in 2 piston sizes, piston 1 and 2. Based on my cylinder size measurements, I ordered the piston 1 size, the smaller size. I'm going to be checking the clearance and also the ring end gap. As you can see, 2 rings are included with the kit, a wrist pin, clips, and also a new small end bearing. You also get some washers for the cylinder head and cylinder head gaskets, and also a selection of base gaskets and power valve gaskets. The first thing I'm going to check is the ring end gap, and in the KTM repair manual it specifies the method for measuring the ring end gap. So you insert the ring into the cylinder, push it down 20 millimeters, and then measure the gap using a feeler gauge. And the spec is less than or equal to 0.4 millimeters for both rings. Okay, so I have both the rings, and I have actually already measured the old rings, and they were surprisingly good. Using my feeler gauges, I measured greater than 0.3 and less than 0.35. So for 130 hours to still be within spec, I think is really good. Okay, so I'm going to start with 0.25 and see whether that fits. And that fits in, no problem. And 0.3 millimeters fits as well. So I'll try 0.35. And 0.35 does not fit. The gap is greater than 0.3 and less than 0.35. And I'll check the other ring as well. And 0.3 fits in. I'll check whether 0.35 fits in as well. And 0.35 does not fit. So both the rings seem to have a gap greater than 0.3 and less than 0.35. I'm happy with that. I would suggest if you have a gap less than 0.3 millimeters that you adjust it carefully using a file and make it so that 0.3 is a good fit. Yeah, the spec is less than 0.4, so I think that's greater than 0.3, less than 0.35 is a great place to start for new rings. And next I'm going to be measuring the piston, and in the KTM repair manual it specifies the measurement method. So you measure down 5 centimeters from the crown of the piston and measure the diameter front to back. And for a 300 size 1, the diameter should be between 71.925 and 71.934. And to perform the measurement, you'll need a micrometer. So the one I have is made by Midstoil, and it's a digital micrometer. So it reads in millimeters to 3 decimal places, and the range is from 50 up to 75 millimeters. So ideal for 2-stroke, both 250 and 300 measurements. Measure the piston and also use with a bore gauge to do your cylinder measurements. So really handy tool to have. and I'm reading 71.933 millimeters. Okay, so now I can calculate my piston to cylinder clearance, and I did my cylinder measurement in video 1, and you can see the results here. So front to back, it was 72.008 millimeters. My piston measurement is 71.933, so subtract those two and you get 0.075 millimeters. And in the manual, the repair manual, you can see the specification for new is between 0.066 and 0.088. So 0.75 is between those numbers, and the wear limit is 0.1 millimeter. So I'm happy with that. If you want to calculate the minimum clearance, then you would use the smaller number of your cylinder and calculate again. And if you do that, you can be sure that you won't have any clearance problems. One reason I went with the number 1 piston is the wear on my cylinder was very low, and I'm happy with the measurements I'm getting with the clearance. So I'm happy to go with a size 1 piston, and yeah, no problems at all. If you do have a larger cylinder bore, I would check it very carefully. If it's gone very oval, and possibly, for example, the front to back is a size 2 cylinder, but left to right is still size 1, that might indicate that you really need to get the cylinder replated and rehoned. So I would probably not use that as is. If you want to go ahead and use a cylinder that is still low hours and is clearly in good shape, you could make that decision, but really the best way is to do measurements. And before installing the cylinder on the engine, a good check to make, particularly if you've replaced any of the power valve parts, or if it's a brand new cylinder, is to measure and adjust as necessary the Z distance. The Z distance is the distance from the lower edge of the control flap to the top of the cylinder, and the spec is 50 millimeters. Okay, so I'm getting ready to install the piston in the engine, and the first thing you need to do, or the first thing I do, is put one of the circlips in the piston on one side while the piston's on the bench. Regarding circlips, there's a choice. The piston kit comes with the standard KTM style C-clips. These are pretty difficult to install. The wire they use is very stiff, and you typically end up scraping the piston, scratching it, even if you're pretty careful. I do not like these. I actually made a special tool to install these, which does work pretty well, especially on the bench. It's easy to use. So what I'm going to do is install the C-clip on one side, and the other side I'm going to use what's called an easy clip. And you can see this has ears, and you can use some pliers to compress it and install extremely easily. You can purchase these from your KTM dealer. I know other online retail stores have them as well. You can see here the KTM part number. I'll put the part number on the screen in case you want to purchase some. Okay, so I've loaded the circlip into the tool I made. This has a tapered bore, so it's larger bore this side, and you can just push the circlip down. It gets compressed, and you just stop pushing when the circlip reaches this surface on the bench. And you can see here the gaps here, and when you're installing the circlip into the piston, you want the gap either at the top or the bottom. I'm going to position it at the top. I think it's a little bit more secure if the gap is here, less likely to come out. So the method used for this tool, I've actually marked with a Sharpie where the gap is, so I can easily position that at the top. And then I take my punch tool, position that on top, and then I use a hammer and force the circlip into the piston. And hopefully you can see there the circlip has been installed. Super easy to use. I know some manufacturers do offer similar tools. I made this pretty easily on a lathe. If you have a lathe at home, it's a good little project. And next I'm installing the rings. So this piston has 2 rings, top and bottom, and each ring has a letter N marked on it, and the letter goes up. So make sure you get that right. The way I install the rings is I start against one stop, just to insert the ring into the groove, and then carefully feed it over the top of the piston without straining it, and it clips back in. This one's just dropped down into the groove a little bit, but it's pretty easy to do. And then make sure it's not bent and rotates freely. And I'll do the other one as well. So just start one end, make sure your letter is up, put it into the groove just where the stop is, and then just feed it round, and that's it. And for new pistons, I like to put some 2-stroke oil on the bore where the wrist pin goes. You don't need a huge amount, but I think it's a good idea to have some lube in there. And I also put some lube in the ring gap. Again, you don't need a huge amount, and I spread this around, but I think it's a good idea. I know some people like to assemble their pistons completely dry. I'm not one of those people. Okay, I've wiped off the excess oil. The piston is now ready to install onto the conrod. And I'm going to go ahead and put some 2-stroke oil on the small end conrod bearing as well, and lube that up. And a note about base gaskets. So before you install the cylinder, you'll need to install the base gasket. So really good idea if you want to keep the same squish on your head as before the top end overhaul. A really good idea to keep the original base gasket and measure that. So I measured this, it's 0.06 thick, and it's made up of 2 gaskets. Nearly, in my experience, nearly all the late model bikes come with this setup. So a 0.2 and a 0.4 millimeter base gasket sandwiched together. And by changing the base gasket thickness, you will either lift or lower the cylinder on the engine, which will result in the squish increasing or decreasing. So if you have a thicker base gasket, it will lift the cylinder up and the squish will get looser. I always check the deck height, which is the distance from the top of the cylinder to the top of the piston when it's at top dead center. And I typically aim for 0, so 0 gap, 0 difference between those two. So once I've fitted the cylinder, I'll be checking the deck height as well. And once you've selected your gaskets, it's a good idea to check that they measure the correct thickness. So this combination of 0.2 and 0.4 is spot on 0.6, so I'm going to go ahead and fit these. And on my bike, I'm using a TSP head and insert. And actually on the reverse side of the insert, it has various information. So it's got the engine size 300 EXC. And it does list the base gasket thickness, which is listed as 0.60 millimeters. So that's interesting. And also the squish 1.2, and the compression ratio is listed as 12.7. Okay, I've cleaned up the gasket sealing surfaces on the engine cases, as you can see here. To do that, I use a ceramic scraper to carefully remove any leftover gasket material. However you do it, be very careful that you don't gouge into the aluminium. And then I can put on my gaskets. Interestingly, I did check, but these ones are symmetrical. So I don't think it really matters which way these go, from left to right. Obviously, front and rear is different, and you need the holes in the gasket at the front. And next I'm putting in the small end bearing, which I've already lubed up. And next you can put the piston on, and the piston, it might be a bit difficult to see in the video, but it has an arrow here which points forwards. The other easy way to tell which way it goes round is the ring gaps go at the back of the engine. So make sure you get the piston on the right way, and you can slide it over the crank or the conrod and then insert the wrist pin. And I have already put some lube on the wrist pin, and that's pushed through easily. And next I'm going to install the easy clip using some pliers. No, I've got a rag down here in case I drop it, but should be fine. And that's the clip installed, and you can easily adjust the gap position to exactly where you want it. And my gap I put at the top. If you prefer, you can have the gap at the bottom. Either is fine, but you should not have the gap on either side or anywhere else. The reason being, when the piston is accelerating up and down, if the gap is on one of the sides, it can tend to force the clip to compress and might loosen and come out. So the best position is to have the gap either at the top or bottom. Okay, so I'm getting ready to install the cylinder on the piston. I've thoroughly cleaned the cylinder. I showed or described that in part 2, and it's very clean. There's no damage to the cylinder. I had cracked the flange piece, which I replaced. Other than that, there was no damage, so I'm really pleased with the condition of the cylinder. The cross hatching is still very clearly visible on all of the cylinder, so I have not honed it, and certainly doesn't need replating or anything. So to recap, the cylinder has done 130 hours. So I'm going to be reusing this, and I've cleaned it. The final step was to wipe it with a microfiber cloth, make sure there's no grit or anything inside. And I did wash it as well with water, soapy water, before that, just to make sure there's no dirt. And I should note, I've got the piston down as far as it'll go. I just put the gearbox in neutral and move the piston down. And what I was doing there was aligning the cylinder with the piston, and at the same time compressing the rings around the pin on the piston, and carefully sliding it down. And yeah, if you just do it very carefully and slowly, supporting the cylinder well, you should find it slides together pretty easily. Definitely don't rush anything. If for some reason it's not going on, take a rest, maybe try again. And I should note that I've got the wiring out of the way of the cylinder, so I've actually used a couple of zip ties to pull the wiring up towards the frame to make more room. But yeah, it slides on pretty easily. And I also have both radiators in place. There's no need to take those off. You can take them off if you like, but as you saw, it goes on pretty easily. And then once you have the cylinder in place, it's a good idea to check that the piston goes up and down freely and the rings aren't caught or anything like that. So I've just put it in gear and I'm holding this cylinder down with my hand because it's not bolted down yet. And using the rear wheel, I can move the piston up and down. Very smooth, definitely the rings aren't caught, and I'm happy to carry on with the assembly. Okay, I've put these stud nuts on and these all need to be torqued to 38 Newton meters. The way I like to do it is first snug them all down by hand in a crisscross pattern, and then torque them. The access, especially to the front ones, is limited, so you'll find it difficult to use a socket. I'm using a ring combination wrench just to hand tighten them first. And then for the final torque, I'm using this Tornici torque wrench. This is really nice. It has exchangeable heads and it's 13 millimeters. And this works really well for this application. And then I'm going to check they're all okay. And if you want a cheaper option, you can get a torque adapter like this. This is a 13 millimeter one made by Signet. I do sell these on the Tokyo Off-Road web shop. And you can put it on your torque wrench. If you put it at 90 degrees to the head, you can set the torque normally on the torque wrench and torque that way. Okay, so now I'm ready to check the deck height. And the deck height is the difference between the top of the piston and the outer surface of the cylinder when the piston is at top dead center. So I put the bike in gear and I've rotated the piston around to top dead center using the rear wheel. You might have to do it a few times to get it exactly right, but you can see when it is there. And then you put a straight edge across the top. And if it's higher than the cylinder, that would result in a gap between the straight edge and the cylinder. There's no gap there. And I can see just by eyeballing it that it's pretty much spot on. There's no gap, visible gap between the straight edge and the top of the piston. I've got a 0.1 millimeter feeler gauge and that won't fit. So I'm really pleased with that. There's no need to change from my 0.6 millimeter gasket combination. If you did find that the piston is too high, then you'd need to raise the cylinder and use a thicker gasket. Or if the piston's too low, you'd use a thinner base gasket. So it's easy to adjust, and yeah, using this method, very quick and accurate measurement to do. Okay, next I'm going to install the power valve cover on the right hand side, and I have a TSP oversized power valve cover. I've got a new gasket. This is the stock gasket, and same shape, so no problem at all. And install the screws. These are low torque. The torque spec is 6 Newton meters, so you want to be careful not to overdo it. And my power valve cover from TSP came with a longer screw in the top right fastener position, so I'm reinstalling that. If you have a stock one, I think all the fasteners are the same length. And next I'm going to install the left-hand side power valve cover. Again, I've got new gasket and install all the screws. These two, again, 6 Newton meters, so low torque. Be careful of that. I'm going to use a torque wrench. And next I'm going to install the power valve actuator, and I've put a little bit of silicone grease around here. I first wiped it off, made sure it was completely clean, put the grease on, and it has a seal in the cover here, and you obviously want to make sure that's clean as well. The other thing to check is that this slot and the power valve actuator lines up, and when you press it on, you'll feel whether it engages. So mine slides right on, but yeah, check that, make sure it's okay. Then you can install the screws, and I'm using medium strength Loctite 243 for the screws. And you will need to reset the power valve. I have a TSP ERM. It's very easy to do using that. If you don't have one of those, I have a separate video which I'll provide a link to in the description of this one. And next I'm installing the head, so I'm putting in new O-rings. I've put a light coating of silicone grease on the O-rings, and you want to make sure they sit nicely in the grooves on the cylinder. And I've already put the inner one in. So the silicone grease does help keep the O-rings in the grooves. It also lubricates them so they can move around a little bit while you're tightening things up, and helps them, well, helps prevent pinching. Okay, so now I can install the head and 2-piece heads. The way I like to do it is separate the dome from the outer, and that allows you to position the lip into the groove and make sure it's engaged properly. If you don't have it in the groove there and start tightening it down, you'll damage the cylinder. I've also put the O-ring in, and I've got a light coating of silicone grease on that as well. And next I can put the head cover on, and you should note that the water connection does not go forwards, it goes off to the side, and there's actually an arrow. This is a TSP head, but there's an arrow here pointing forwards. So the bleed screw actually points back, so that's a good reference. And I've got my head bolts with new copper washers. I'm going to install those, hand tighten them, and then torque them to spec. Okay, I've snugged all the head bolts down by hand, and I'm going to torque them to spec now, which is 27 Newton meters, and I'm going to do it in a crisscross pattern. And next I'm going to plug the actuator in, and then I can install my Bulletproof Designs guard. Again, I'm using Loctite 243 medium strength, and torque to 5 Newton meters. And a Bulletproof Designs guard, you can use some zip ties to hold the cabling in place. And next I'm installing the engine braces, and I've cleaned off all the screws, and I'm using Loctite 243, which is medium strength. And the torque for all of the engine brace bolts is 25 Newton meters. Okay, so while the spark plug is still out, I thought it'd be a good time to do a compression test. I've connected my OTC compression tester with the long reach adapter, and I've reconnected my battery. So I'm all ready to do the test. I'm going to press the starter and test the compression. And right now I'm getting very slightly over 220 psi. I did look up the compression I had when I originally fitted this head, and it was 218, so very similar level. This is the medium compression TSP head. And off camera I reinstalled the temp sensor and the radiator hose, which goes from right to left, and also the cylinder head hose. Leave it not. And when refilling your coolant system on these bikes, it's important to bleed air from the head, and that's done using this screw. So I just put some coolant in, and I'm going to loosen this, and you basically just loosen it until you can see some coolant coming out. So it allows the air to go out, and then you retighten it. So there I can see some coolant coming out, so I can retighten. And then once you've bled the system, top off the radiator to the correct level. Okay, so now I'm going to reset the power valve, and I have a TSP ERM, which you can load maps, etc. And you can also do the power valve reset using this. If you don't have this and running the stock ECU, a map, I recommend checking out my power valve reset video. I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. So the first step is to open the throttle approximately 50%, and then you go to the extras page, and you might have to scroll to this page, but there's a ECU power option, and you need to switch the power off. And it's switched off there. Just wait until it goes off. It's gone off, and then you can toggle it on again. My fingers are very dry. And then you hold it in that position for about 10 seconds. And then release the throttle. And you could hear the power valve actuating and the fuel pump as well. And when all of that stops, then the power valve reset is complete, and you can disconnect the ERM. And this is the first startup since the rebuild. Bike has done almost an hour since the top end rebuilt. It's running really well, feels really fresh. If you enjoyed this mini series, top end rebuild, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.